Check, check. Check, 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 check. Kathy, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
Someone's AI just picked that up. So we've got our class in here. You won't be able to see them while we're talking, but once we get to the Q&A, we will like turn the camera around so you can see everybody. And then this is Jordan, who will be interviewing
Hi, Jordan.
Today.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
All right. So I'll go ahead and can y'all hear her all right? Is that loud enough? Yeah. All right. So I'll go ahead and introduce you, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jordan, who's prepared some questions, and we'll go from there.
Amazing.
And you pronounce your last name Iandoli, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So our next guest in Women in Hip Hop, the Unconference, Kathy Iandoli, is a writer, professor, and journalist who's been advocating for women in hip hop throughout her career. Iandoli, in every sense of the word, has been a true advocate for women in hip hop throughout her 25-year career in the music industry. Her journalistic work, which can be found in publications like Vibe, The Source, The Village Voice, Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, Cosmopolitan, and more, explores women in hip hop's resistance to the binds of the music industry, past and present. Her full-length books, like NPR's 2019 Book of the Year, God Save the Queens, which for some reason I can't find my copy of, but I do have the Oracle deck that I'll pass around in a second so y'all can see that. That was her first book. The Essential History of Women in Hip Hop came out in 2019. Then Baby Girl, better known as Aaliyah, the biography, came out in 2021. And then, of course, we're here to also talk with her about her more recent book, Who's That Girl, which she wrote with Eve. And then she's also working on a biography for Lil' Kim right now. All of these books highlight the ways in which women define themselves through and in spite of the constraints of the American music industry. So in addition to all of these extensive author works and all of this incredible work, Iandoli has served as a music adjunct faculty and a faculty in residence at NYU and works as a media coach for artists today. She's also mentoring other brilliant writers like one of our former guests this semester, Taylor Crumpton. So please give a warm welcome to one of the foundational thinkers about women in hip hop today, Kathy Iandoli.
Hi, everyone.
Want to go ahead?
Oh,
yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
So I have a lot of questions. I was doing some research and I'm really impressed by what you've done this far. Well, I guess my first question is, have you ever faced criticism being a journalist?
In general?
Maybe as of recently or the beginning of your career?
You know, it's interesting because when I first started out in journalism, right, I think the relationship between the artist and the journalist was very different. We weren't exactly, let's say, categorized as the media, right? So it was a different kind of relationship. And when you're talking about something like hip hop, at that point in time, starting, I don't want to say so early on in hip hop, but I started writing in like the year 2000. So we were still kind of in this way in which we were still building out what this was becoming in terms of telling the story to the greater public. So I think nowadays that energy has kind of shifted, right? We're in this era of clickbait, journalists wanting to be more famous than their actual subjects, and it's an all around kind of distrust, right? So I think what I'm lucky to have had a significant track record as being more of an artist advocate. So I think when artists speak with me, they know what they're getting into. But in general, the relationship between journalists and musicians, celebrities, whomever is incredibly strained right now.
Why do you say that?
Because of just the dynamic of what the demands are. I started in print journalism. So you're talking about 4 to 6 months to work on an article or a story. And the goal was not to get as many eyes on the headline as it was to pick up that magazine and actually read it, right? If I'm doing an interview now for the internet, so to speak, you're actually doing it for social media. So in essence, you're not writing it for the story. You're actually writing it for the headline that goes on Instagram. So it changes everything about that.
I was doing some research and I saw that in a video, I can't think of her name right now, but you literally wrote her book. She said that the process of getting you guys to be very vulnerable in her process, Eve, it took her some time. And she was going back and forth and trying to consider that it wasn't a salacious book, but you really had to get to that point of vulnerability. Can you walk me through what that was like?
So I think, when an artist or any celebrity, any public figure decides that they're going to tell their life story, right? That's an incredibly raw situation, right? Especially with musicians who, even when I coach artists, a lot of times their go-to answer is, I speak through my music, right? So what happens when you're now tasked with 75,000 words about your entire life, right? Or even a period of it. We call that a period memoir, right? So when you're tasked with this job now of telling your entire life story and not being poetic about it in the sense of like, well, I can hint at certain things in music. I can use different metaphors. I've got 8 bars, 16 bars, whatever, that I can dedicate to kind of decorating a situation as opposed to just straightforward, this is what happened, right? That's an entirely different place of creativity. So early on, when Eve and I first started working on the book, she was in interview mode naturally, because you're sitting down and you're saying, so what were you like as a kid? Can you describe to me where you grew up in Philadelphia. And for me, I'm like very big on context, right? So we're trying to get this story out. What color were the walls in your home? All of these things. And I remember, Eve was just like, Philly was very cool, like, and it was very interview. So I said to her, I said, listen, I was like, if you're gonna go there and write the memoir, you have to really go there. And you kind of have to break down a little bit of the wall that again has naturally been built between the journalist and the subject, right? Understanding that like this is not going in an article. It's not going to show up on the shade room. At least not by our choices, right? But at the same time, like it's understanding that I know that this setup looks all too familiar to you, but the conditions have changed. You can trust the person you're talking to for a number of reasons. First, starting with an NDA, right? But the other reason is that the whole goal is to extract stories from you. It's not to extract a headline out of you. But when you tell your truth, some people might perceive those things as salacious because you're being so honest and you're being so raw. And sometimes those things don't always resonate with people who might have hurt you or might have done things to you, right? Like in any way, shape, or form, if you're telling a story, if it involves you, it's about you. But and how someone made you feel is still about you. But to the third party reading, sometimes that can be seen as salacious. But really, the whole point of the memoir is to tell your story.
So I had a question about that actually as well, because Jordan, like you brought something that I was thinking a lot about. I finished the memoir last night, and in the later chapters, and I didn't send you guys these chapters, and I wish I would have read ahead sooner so that I could have. There's like 2 chapters that are dealing with her relationship with like not even Nicki Minaj specifically, but like almost the figure or the image of Nicki Minaj and how she has to navigate that as an artist. But
Yeah.
many times earlier in the memoir, she kind of like gets to the point of saying it was someone, but we're not really going to talk about it. And so I wanted to ask about how you all kind of decided where the boundaries were there of like, where do you kind of pull back and where do you push forward when we're talking about people who are so high profile in the kind of environment that you started off talking about a few minutes.
I mean, that's a good question. I think that setting the boundaries of knowing how much is too much when you're mentioning other people in the story of your life, you kind of have to strike that balance. And sometimes it does involve situations that have happened that don't necessarily require, this happened with this person. Rather, this was a collection of people that made me feel a specific way, right? And that's exactly what had happened in the earlier years. It wasn't just like one specific person, rather just like a couple of individuals as any artist is coming up and just trying to find their footing. And in Eve's case, wanting this sisterhood, right? That didn't exactly work out immediately. In the case of mentioning Nikki specifically, you're talking about like one person who the whole point was Eve was speaking on something much greater. And it was that perception that has been built around women in hip hop that there can only be one. And prior to that, you have this artist who won the first Grammy that is now, I think, the rap melodic performance. Back then, I forget what rap song collaboration with for Let Me Blow Your Mind. So you're talking about this artist who, when she entered in, was hitting all of these new territories, right? She's winning a Grammy that had never been even created before. She is one of the first women in hip hop to executive produce her own series called Eve, right? First woman in hip hop to have her own fashion line. You're talking hip hop to Hollywood, all of these things. And Eve very much discusses being that it girl and feeling at times like being the only one. And then by the time Nikki entered into the barbershop franchise, recognizing, oh, she's the one right now, right? And her having to come to terms with that understanding that had been built around women in hip hop and having to then rationalize that no, there's 2 of us standing here and that's cool. And then also, she talks in the book about watching Nikki like quickly like write her her bars in between filming and having to like go on tour, hop off tour, get in front of the camera and act. All of these things. And she started to sympathize with her and was like, yeah, I've been there before. So it was what could have been kind of like this anxiety inducing moment actually became kind of a beautiful one. And I'm really glad that she spoke about that so freely, because then Nikki had responded in kind, and it was just a really great moment. Like I really loved how from beginning and middle and end how that all ended up.
How long did it take you guys to actually finish this book? How many months?
Um, that's a good question. I think we started conceptualizing at the top of 2023, putting the whole proposal together. And then by the spring, I think we had long since been in deal mode. So I would say about 10 months, give or
How did you
take.
find a publisher?
Sorry.
Oh, how did you find a publisher?
I mean, we had a lot that wanted the book. So basically, when you have the book writing process, usually whether it's with doing it by yourself or working with a co-author, is you put together this proposal um, that basically highlights what this book is going to be about, outlines the chapters and things like that, and then your literary agent brings it out into the publishing world, and you kind of get this. It's almost like a bidding war. It's like different publishing houses will give their bid, right? But then there's this like a situation where you can do like a preempt where someone's like, listen, I really want this. So how about this for this and this? And then you can say, ding ding ding, the winner. So we had like quite a few that were all invested, and then we decided to go with Hanover.
Are there any other people that have approached you about writing their book autobiography? Because I know you have written a few, but has anyone stuck out to you lately that you want to work with, artist wise, men or women?
Um, there's a bit of a wait list right now, so I'm very fortunate to have that. And usually when an artist comes to me, I automatically kind of sign an NDA, so I can't say the names. But I will say, if given the opportunity and she's listening, Ms. Lauren Hill would be the one that I would want. Just as, I mean, if you can see her behind me.
I do actually, I do. So I also realized that you said that your mother was a really source of inspiration for you when
Yeah,
you were a kid. And then I saw at one point when I was watching something, you said that you worked in a CD store, and
I
she
did.
really was a source of inspiration for you at the time. You walked me through what that was like when you were younger.
Well, I mean, I owe my entire career to my mother just for believing in me when I came home one day and said, "I'm not going to law school. I'm interviewing rappers for a living." And very fortunate that she said, "Okay, whatever makes you happy." Um, so I started working at a record store when I was 16 years old. I had just always wanted to work in music in some capacity, and at that age, I came up in the era of the film Empire Records. If people haven't seen it, I suggest you do, where they all work in a record store. And I was like, yeah, that's going to be me. I'm doing that. So my mom used to drive me. So then I had enough money by the time I turned 17. I'd saved up and I got my own little car. So I was able to drive myself back and forth. But by the time I reached like college years, um, I started working for the Roots and started handing out flyers for them, promoting their concert series. And, my mother just had a lot of faith in me. Just, she always knew I was a little bit of a different child in the sense that I was like not going to sit in an office. As much as I tried, I really did try. I tried my hardest. It wasn't going to work. This is my office. But when even trusting me to come home at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning after I've promoted the Black Lily series for the Roots, and like just understanding that, these were all the building blocks to what I'd like to believe was my success story. But my mom just was so instrumental in saying to me, like, look, if this is what you want to do, um, you don't have to leave the house yet. I'm not kicking you out. So do what you need to do, work as hard as you need to work because you have a place to lay your head, right? Leave when you're ready. And that, I think, was the greatest gift that I could have, because while all of my other friends right after like graduating college, or even like during college, wanting to just like automatically get a bunch of roommates and live in this apartment and live that independent life, which I respect that too. I was just, you know, working 15 different jobs and saving up my money until I was ready to jump. And she was just right there, just saying, "Okay, honey, when you're ready."
I know you mentioned the roots, but I saw in an interview that you said, well, someone mentioned that you help generate sales for 112. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, yeah.
You like Nardwar? So the one thing that's interesting, actually used this in my interview for the Roots. Okay, so I was working at the record store, and one of the things you could sign up for was to be like, to win like best marketer in the region, right? So it was for 112's second album, right? Not the one with Cupid on it, though I wish it was. Um, they used to have these things that were like the size of a vinyl. I'm trying to show you an example. Like so you take like the size of a vinyl, and it was called a record flat, right? So what they would do is they would send you a bunch of flats, and they would be like, "All right, do something with this. Whatever looks the most creative," right? And you only had this like little end cap area to decorate. So I went in. It was actually quite sad. I didn't do my job for like 2 weeks, right? Cutting out each of the members. I made a wall, right? And then I put the past projects. I had the CD singles. We had this thing called microfiche where you would have to order international. I got the international imports. I made this whole thing, and then I like took pictures, and I was like, right? Because I was a marketing major in college too. So I was like, yes, this is happening. And I want a gift card. So when I did the Roots interview, I mentioned it, and they were like, "Well, if you can market 112 like that." And after that, the store just had me market, like do the like displays and stuff. So, it was like the running joke that like Kathy's like the marketing person.
I listened to this audiobook. I think it was like a preview of the Aaliyah book, like 3 years ago. Do you think you'd ever write a follow up to that book or any other book, maybe?
The
You did
Aaliyah
get
book?
really good reviews. Yeah. Would you ever write a follow up, maybe, given what has happened now with her music being released on streaming services? I mean, her fans still bring up like what should be there, given her legacy. What do you think?
I don't think I would write a follow-up to the book as much as I would want to create a follow-up of a book highlighting all of the incredible artists that have been inspired by Aaliyah. Like, I argue that Aaliyah is the godmother of all R&B. So if I were to write another book that is in that realm, it would more or less be what Aaliyah inspired after. Because I think the one thing that is just so amazing is that now that we have her music on streaming platforms, you're able to like put her music on a playlist alongside SZA, alongside Kehlani, alongside Summer Walker, and there's this thread of continuity. Back even a couple of years ago, you had to like dig or go on YouTube to find like an illegal rip to listen to hear it. But if you put like a song like More Than a Woman, or even like a deeper cut like I Can Be, and you like weave in like SZA and the other artists, you're like, you hear it. You hear the evolution. So yeah, long-winded answer. I would definitely write about her impact as opposed to continuing the story of her.
Are you meeting any deadlines right now, given what you may have any a website, whether it's Rolling Stone, VH1 right now? Are they in talks to write certain articles at the moment?
For me personally,
Or maybe for both, depending on what they need on the website.
so right now, I'm in my second round of book edits. No, my first round. Oh, my first round of book edits. What I deliver is called the first pass, right? Or you pass it back. And I'm entering into those edits right now for my next book that we'll be announcing in a couple months. Um, I'm working with another artist, and so I do kind of like this hold on any articles right now, and a lot of my media coaching clients have picked up quite a bit. So I have been getting the itch to write some pieces again, and sometimes people, publications will come to me and they'll be like, "Hey, can you write this?" A lot of times, especially during Women's History Month. So if something comes across my desk that I know is not going to be too heavy of a lift and get in the way of my ability to do my edits and like teach my kids at NYU and all this other stuff, then I would definitely do it.
How do you prevent burnout as a writer? I
Huh.
know you probably get ideas all the time.
That's a really, really good question. I have a lot of journals that are labeled for different things. So one is for just like overall inspiration, one is for professional inspiration, one is for new projects. I have one that's specifically just Eves of us like putting together the stuff we're doing next. Um, One thing that I've learned probably just, after my mom passed and then going into the pandemic and all this other stuff is understanding a work life balance when your entire life is being a creative, right? And I think the one thing is that, when having worked in journalism specifically for so long, you're always just walking down the street trying to figure out, or you're just programmed almost to be finding your next story, right? Even when you go to like a really good restaurant, you're thinking about, maybe I should review this, or maybe I can bring an artist with me and do the interview here. It's never just like, hey, I just want to sit with my friends and eat. And I've learned to get to that point now where I have the space in which I write and I create. I'm very fortunate that artists like Eve have become my friends, so I can like, we can just have a conversation, and it's not just like, all right, what are we getting into next? Like, and I have to credit Eve too for that, because we have definitely separated our conversations to be like, we're gonna have a business call, as opposed to just like, hey girl, what are you doing, right? So learning how to separate those moments while still taking in things, listening to music to listen to it, not to review it, right? These are things that having been on the beat as a journalist for so long, you don't realize affects every single part of your being. So what I had to actually do is learn how to separate those two worlds so I can listen to music again and enjoy it and not be like, oh, I wonder when I can talk to Georgia Smith about this new single. No, just enjoy the song, right? Um, but that came from 26 years of doing this. So, I can understand why young journalists are still doing that, because I was definitely in the thick of it at one time.
I'm glad you brought that up because I know that for whoever it is, I don't know, non-famous or famous person, you have to be very mindful of like personal and professional because some people may have like the back pocket of knowing somebody and they can have pieces of that. Have you ever come across people that just want you to write stories to make them look good, but you think you can't do it, like journalistically wise? I think that was a lot.
No, that's a great question. You're a good interviewer.
Thank you.
So I think, I'm trying to think.
I know you know somebody. Come on, come on.
You know what? You know what?
Come on.
No, there have been times where an artist has wanted to do a press run in the midst of controversy
Yeah.
and have wanted to look like a Boy Scout in their interview and not be asked about certain things.
I mean, off the record, like give me questions to make me look good. I don't want to say who or what, but there was this one thing going on at the time, and somebody was on a podcast, and there was a lot of like social media chatter about this one specific person. And the one thing that people took away from it was like a fee as a woman or something. And they went on a podcast, and the way it was asked kind of like rubbed people the wrong way. But this one viral moment, just like people running with this narrative that she was a certain type of person, given like her relationship experience. It's just like, oh, we finally got her. As a woman, like tearing her down for like her work ethic and like who she did an athlete, so she addressed like their relationship, and people kind of, I think you know who I'm talking about. I can't say it, but you can guess. Yeah.
There's two different things that play with that, right? For one, it's being a woman on the job. There's kind of like this idea that you're able to be swayed a little bit more, right? Like, or intimidated, let's say, intimidated into the what's deemed to be the correct route of how this like fantasy interview goes. For me, I remember one time specifically where an artist did want to just look incredible in the midst of controversy. And I had said, I'm asking these questions. I I'm never one to like, I don't want to create a moment. Like I don't. I have no interest in making a moment at this juncture. The moment that I make is through my work, right? And like real work, not my headline. So, but at that point in time, I still wasn't invested in making a moment, but I didn't have any body of work to even, be my moment at that point. But I was like, I gotta ask these questions. I was working for a publication that assigned it. They said these are the questions you have to ask. And I remember that's when I learned a really valuable lesson on how you frame questions, right? And I got the answer that I wanted, that I needed rather. And the artist appreciated the approach. But what I did do was I asked the publication to let it run as a Q&A because I wanted his answer to be preserved and not be subject to either my editor's edit or my taking a chunk of the words and weaving it in. So because it wasn't something that was, if it was something that was terrible, I wouldn't do the interview. But it was something controversial, right? Enough to be like, hey, I have to talk about this. But I asked it, and it was just, the answer was right there, the question and the answer, how I said asked the question and how the answer came out. And I think on both sides everybody appreciated that.
Has a story ever fallen in your lap and you just kind of keep like a piece of information to yourself? You worked in the industry for a long time, so I can only imagine like what you like. You can't say things at the moment, but like when the world finds out, you just like finally, I could say it.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
One time in particular, um, an artist had come out to me, um, 8 years before they came out to the world, and they slipped up, and their manager came in and said, "Oh," and I said, "Don't worry, it's not my job. It's not my place." So when they finally did speak their truth, I was happy for them. But it took a long time. But that they were going at their own pace. But yeah, it was one of those moments where um I had to, when I submitted my transcript to the publication, I took it out because again, like I'm like, I don't want to hurt this person in any way. So yeah, that I yeah, I remember that story has always stayed in my mind, and I'm very happy I chose the moral route.
Well, this is my last question. I find it interesting that a lot of musicians are rejoicing in TikTok's demise, but one thing that's interesting to me, I don't see much attention going towards artists in terms of getting publication from journalists. You get me your that.
Wait, I'm sorry, the sound cut out. What was that last part?
Oh, one thing that sticks out to me is that a lot of artists have rejoiced in the demise of TikTok, but for you, I can only imagine that the traditional forms of media come from writing, journalism, there to just speak down a platform that's like for any music career wise.
I mean, I personally love TikTok. I think that it's I was I was nervous when we lost it for what, 6 hours, but from an artist standpoint, and this is different for my take on this is very different from speaking as a journalist or just as someone who works directly with artists, right? Especially during the pandemic, getting a glare, sorry. Especially during the pandemic, I was dealing with artists who were signed because of TikTok, right? So having to help them figure out their narrative when they were actual creatives and they were actual artists, but they were famous because of some TikTok creation or something to that effect, or working with a legacy artist whose song just popped on TikTok. And now they have to come in and understand this platform, right? Figuring out how to help tell those stories with the artist was really being able to put my journalist hat back on and frame it in this way of like, how do you want this narrative to look, right? Because I think the problem with social media platforms is you can't really tell who jumped on one day, invented a dance and got famous, and who had this journey of wanting to be an artist and then happened to be like, you know what, let me try this avenue, right? It's kind of hard to tell the difference when both have millions of views, right? Sometimes people can very obviously tell in terms of the quality of the art, but that's not always the case. Sometimes people just have raw talent and they just hopped on and they're like, I don't want to look like some overnight success that got lucky off XYZ. But and that has been for me what has been a lot of artists' reservations with using TikTok. But a lot of labels have been like, they need to know how to use TikTok, they need to know how to do these things. So you taking the journalistic approach to being like use it as a piece of your narrative and developing your story arc has proven like beneficial for me as like a journalist. Watching people, you know, deliver the news in 15 seconds or less, you know, can't fit a book on TikTok, so I'm fine.
I have one more point. I'll let him take over. But I think I saw a tweet from like Tamar Braxton and Queen Naja, like about the fact that, oh, go back to work. And I think if it wasn't for TikTok, I wouldn't see much engagement from them on social media platforms. Your point, you said music labels want you to push TikTok, and if you don't have a TikTok worthy song, you're not going to get that. So the TikTok kind of like leaving here and there. I'm just like, well, I don't know if I would keep up with you that much if it wasn't for TikTok. Because a few years ago, celebrities didn't want to get on TikTok, but if they're, I'm not going to keep up with you. And the thing is, people have different fans globally, worldwide. So you're taking away that attention from you, but also the profit you can get from your fans around the world. And I don't think they understand that.
100%. And I think the thing that people also have to keep in mind is that when you're talking about what the record label's demand is, ultimately TikTok serves as a platform to inspire the user to jump off the platform to another platform to stream the music, right? And for the most part, if you have a favorite part of that song or a favorite version, I mean, you know, Willow Smith, Caught a Vibe. I forgot the name of the song now.
You're talking about Krishan Rock or something?
No. That meet me at our spot. That Willow Smith.
Yeah.
So that version was like, that was the live version, and they had an original version on streaming platforms that people didn't respond as well to as that live version, right? So you're not necessarily trying to inspire people to jump off and stream that existing song, because then they're gonna be like, well, I'm not gonna listen to that again. I'm going right back to TikTok, right? So if you're using it just for the basis of inspiring the user to jump off the platform, right? That's not always successful, especially if you're only caught on to a piece of the song, right? And that's the part you want, right? So you have to use it in other ways. So you have to use it for brand building. You have to use it for story arc development. You have to use it so that people watch these TikToks and say, you know what, I want this person to win. And because I want this person to win, I'm going to jump off and check their catalog. Those are two different approaches. There's a difference between, I like 15 seconds of this song, maybe I'll jump off and listen to the rest, which doesn't always happen as much as, I like you as a personality and I like what you do. Let me hear your music. So what I try to explain to the labels is it's a lot less than getting this person to lip sync someone else's song while they're putting makeup on in the mirror, and more about having this person utilize the platform to give their fans a different take on them and the things. I mean, I could watch Lotto and her sister Brooklyn eat crumble cookies all day. Like, it's just like hilarious. And, you know, I mean, but though you would now develop a relationship with the artist in wanting to then, when they say, by the way, I got this album, you're like, let me go listen to that. Two different approaches. And I try to, as much as I can when I work with artists, promote that part as opposed to, you know, get them to jump off the platform. If they're going to jump, they're going to jump. You're not going to force their hand.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I gotta get out here. Yeah.
So we're gonna transition to Q&A, Jordan.
Thank you.
As always. And so for the folks who are joining us virtually, we're going to privilege student questions first because this is for a class, but we will have a chance to ask other questions as well. So if you want to, put your hand up or throw your question in the chat, you are more than welcome to. So who wants to start us off in the classroom for Q&A? Jaleesa and then Naze. There you go. And then wait until I can go over so the cat can see.
Hello, my name is Jaleesa. I have a question. With all that you've seen and wrote about, I was reading Eve's Who's That Girl book. I have a question for you. Why do you feel that every male group needs that first lady? Like, do you feel like they benefit off of it or profit off of it? Like, why is that so important for any rap group to have that first lady?
Great question. I think that there's I guess there's a couple different ways we can look at it, right? Aesthetically, right? Especially when you're talking about when the demands for the first lady were really strong, right? The mid 90s into the, let's say, early 2000s, right? That era of hip hop was very much rooted in kind of like the like boom bap and even kind of specifically speaking about the Northeast, right? You're talking jeans and Tims and bubble goose coats and all this stuff, right? Like, so this idea of all these guys who are wearing the Northeast hip hop uniform, right? And then you have like a woman who cuts through that, even visually, is a nice break, but it also adds this pop, right? And that's why a lot of times, from a marketing standpoint, they used to only want one woman because you stand out more, right? And even when you're talking about like Southern artists, like when 3 6 Mafia incorporated Gangsta Boo, May She Rest, it was just a very different aesthetic. Like the women grab attention, and the subject matter is different, right? The audience, you bring in the like women listeners. So there were so many different reasons why, right? That this would happen, where there would only be one. When you're talking about it in the sense of the spirit of competition, I have a theory, right? And I think that if there's more than one woman in there who is equally skilled, it starts to create this imbalance where now you have to ask yourself if the men in the group are as strong as lyricists. And then it creates competition, whereas the woman in the beginning is used as kind of like the person who stands out from the rest. When you then become a competition to the guys, suddenly they don't want to have that part. So let's make it a first lady, because we know that there's not going to be someone who wants to be the second lady, right? So we give this very specific, very engendered role. First lady, the whatever you want to call, like, mainly it was always first lady. I'm trying to think of something else. It's not. So it's like the first lady or the queen, right? All of this concept. You can't have more than one when you've given a ranking to the person, right? So I think that created kind of this situation where we can only have one, and we'll just leave it at that. Because, like, personally, I think a lot of times in a lot of crews, the woman of the bunch was actually the most skilled, but who am I to judge, right?
Okay, I just got one more question.
Uh-huh.
With what you just replied with, you have Lil Kim, who put out Ladies Night. Why
Mhm.
can't they put out a whole group? Like you said, you have Flip Mode. It's mostly males back then because that was what's popular. But they advertise females to get the attention. So why couldn't a female just come out with a safe haven for Black female artists, where you got Missy Elliott, all of them working together? I really feel like it would pop off, but I don't know too much about the industry, so
I mean, now you're asking all the right questions, right? Like, I think one thing that when Kim made Ladies Night, and Flip Mode had their own first lady, Rod Digga. So when Kim did Ladies Night, she was very much making that message of saying, look, we're all together here, right? It became one of the like biggest hits, but um the rest of the machine has to understand what that means and move accordingly, and they just didn't. But Kim did her thing, so that's all that matters.
Hello, my name is Naze. This is kind of like back to when you were talking about how like your mother is your biggest inspiration. I'm kind of at that point in my life. Like my mom is a big inspiration to me, but my question is having that type of mother who were like, like I'm gonna support you no matter what, and whenever you're ready, and you seeing like everyone else in your life, like they're living this independent life and moving out. How were you still able to chase your dream without feeling like you were falling behind?
Well, I wasn't falling behind because I was in dream chasing mode. Where I laid my head was actually just, one thing I'll say is this: to get to that proverbial next level is very expensive on the person trying to do it, especially at the time that I entered into the scene, right? There was, this kind of a disparity, like where you had the higher up editors at magazines that were making a ton of money, but then like the writers weren't making as much at that point, like especially freelancers and all this other stuff. And for me, financially speaking, if I had moved out immediately at like 21, 22 years old and didn't wait a few years, I don't know if I could have afforded my dream. It's an expensive dream. It's an expensive dream to keep commuting, to pay rent, to pay bills like that. I mean, I helped my mom out, and as soon as I was able to be just financially stable, I started paying my mom's bills. Like that was like like one thing that I always said to myself is I had to pay her back. I couldn't pay her back for the support, but I had to let her know that I was supporting her in a different way. But I had to work very hard to get to that point. And I think that I do sympathize with people who leave the house or they can't stay in their house. And because the dream is expensive. A lot of times these companies don't want to pay you. They pay you late. They lay people off at a moment's notice. And I was always someone who took on this approach that I'd rather make $100 from 10 places than $1,000 from one. And I kept that going. And I think that's always been the math for me forever, where understanding that a lot of places, especially nowadays, are more reluctant to just throw a sum of money at somebody, you know. Um, that was always an approach I took. And I saved a lot and I didn't spend a lot. And I did what I had to do when I was ready to move. And I paid my first set of bills. I was like, oh, I mean, I always paid like my car and my insurance and stuff like that. But when you're starting paying those bills and you're paying the commuting costs, because remember, I'm from New Jersey. So I only lived in New York City very briefly during grad school. So when I was coming back and forth from New Jersey is expensive. So, and New York City is expensive. You take meetings, sometimes they don't pay for your meals and they pick very expensive restaurants. It's a lot of money to chase your dreams. So I was just happy that my mom gave me that little bit of time. And, I'm to this day, I'm so thankful for it.
And I have one more question. So being working in hip hop, you obviously work with a lot of Black artists and a lot of Black people. Is it hard to be respected, or are you constantly disrespected? And if so, like, how do you navigate that working with Black people?
Um, you know, One thing I'll say is that like I don't believe it. It's impossible to be the perfect ally, right? Like I don't think that there's any way in which you always get it right, right? The one thing that I hope, and most of the time I think I'm right, is that they see my heart. Like they understand that like I'm in this for the love of the art and the culture, but also my job. And this is really something why in recent years I've made this pivot, is my only goal now is to help and advocate and help especially Black women tell these stories, right? Like that's become just what I consider now to be a huge part of my life's work, is working with these incredible artists and helping them tell that story. Because a lot of times it's not like they couldn't tell the story themselves, they write their own rhymes, but sometimes you just need someone to just sit there and listen and be the ear and then help them shape what's coming out. And if that's my only part of it, then I'm still honored to be a part of it. And even working with you know, the new generation of female hip hop artists as their media coach, right? My goal now is to protect them from the media, to have them be equipped with every possible scenario that could ever be thrown at them, because I want to make sure that they continue to be able to tell their story on their terms, how they want to say it. So really, it's just trying to help. I mean, that's really all I can do, is help. And you know, there have been situations where in recent years, just me working with certain artists, other people, you know, being like, well, I could have done that. And, you know, a lot of times before I even step into a project, when I made God Save the Queens, I hit so many fellow authors and said, you want to write a book on women in hip hop? I think you should do it. I kept doing that. I kept going and saying, I think you should do it, until I just got to the point where they were like, no, we think you should do it. And, you know, it wasn't a situation of like asking for permission, but I wanted the story out. And, you know, it was one of those things where they're like, you do it. You've been doing this forever. Like this. So it was it felt good to hear that. But there have been a lot of situations where I've been asked to do certain projects, and I said, this is not for me. I shouldn't be the one helping to tell this story. And I passed it over to you know, other writers, other journalists, authors, and stuff like that. So, you know, it's kind of just it's a delicate balance, but you know, knowing when, you know, you want to help with the story, and then knowing when you got to sit this one out.
Who else wants to ask?
Hi, my name is Jamelyn, and my question is, what about the hip hop industry piqued your interest in making it like your niche for journalism?
Well, I was always a child of hip hop. I used to write graffiti. I learned how to DJ pretty badly, but I did learn. So I'd always been kind of enmeshed in hip hop culture. When it came to the storytelling element of it, I think the thing that I love the most is wanting to hip hop music is the greatest of storytelling, right? So wanting to tell stories about the stories was the thing that intrigued me the most. And that became kind of like the framework. And I was fortunate that I was at that last bit of the hip hop journalism era where people were still interested in the storytelling aspect, right? Before it got to the clickbait stuff and all of that, I was very lucky so that a lot of my stories were rooted in the storytelling. That's really what drew me in, because, you know, coming up in what was like the rise of pop music, there wasn't a lot of storytelling in other genres at that point. There were some, but it wasn't a lot, as much as hip hop had this like rich storytelling. So wanting to be able to talk to artists about what they were going through, what they were thinking about, how these the genesis of certain projects, that's what spoke to me. So already having been a child of hip hop, and then having this kind of environment that was just full of stories, that's what really drew me in.
Thank you.
Wants to ask a question. If anybody online also wants to ask, definitely have the time for it. You want to wait? Let's look at the chat real quick, Jordan.
Hi, may I ask a question?
Hold on. We got Tatiana first, and then I think with Autumn just asked, and so we'll go Tatiana then Autumn. But I think if Tatiana's still here, she's still here.
No, but I'll tell her.
Okay. And then so Autumn, you go ahead. Sorry.
So, my question is, how did you learn how to kind of balance your work-life balance and your faith and into your job that you have now? Because that's what I'm trying to like, especially when I'm trying to find myself like spiritual
Mhm.
wise and everything. Like, it's kind of hard for me to kind of navigate through that. So, how did you learn how to balance that?
That's a great question. So, one thing about me, if anybody pays attention to zodiac, I'm a double Pisces, which means I just have no regard for structure in the midst of creativity. But one thing I did was I set timers, like times, right? So getting up, and even if it's 5 minutes before you tap into whatever you're doing, and you take the time for gratitude or prayer or anything like that, having that kick off your day, that makes a world of a difference in general. Any sort of meditation, whatever the case may be, doing that, um, that actually helps remind you that the first couple minutes of your day are not to look at your phone and check for meetings and check your email and do all that other stuff. So it actually subconsciously sets the tone for the day, where the day is subconsciously for your own betterment, as opposed to just like the professional path that you're putting yourself on. And yeah, we all have bills to pay. So obviously it's not one of those things where it's like, I can't work today, I have to pray. But it's like, as if you set that time and you let it be the thing that you think about when you first wake up, it can ultimately set that tone for you. And then also make it the last thing that you do right before you go to bed. So have your day bookended in your spirituality, so at the middle of the day, you don't feel so pressured to be like, oh my gosh, I forgot to take that moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And it's funny how you mentioned you were a Pisces, because I'm a Pisces as well. And
Oh,
I'm kind
autumn. Yeah. Set alarms if you have to. Set alarms, make a task list, even if the task list says wash my face, whatever. And you're like, I did it. Like, just to give yourself every task you need to do, but at the top of it, if prayer and spiritual practice is a priority to you, put it at the top of the list.
all right, thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions in here? Jordan, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
It's more so about professional endeavors. I know you mentioned at one point you studying marketing. Not so, not the way I envisioned asking, but
Oh wait, you went totally silent.
oh,
Hold on.
okay. I'll just say it again.
Okay.
Can you hear it now?
The sound keeps going in and out. I'm sorry. Could you say that again, Jordan?
This is not the way I envisioned asking, but I know you mentioned at one point you were studying marketing school. I have an interest in it. Do you know professional endeavors for people? Can you hear me?
You go as soon as you say professional endeavor, it goes silent. I don't know why, but here, try.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
This is not the way I envisioned asking this question. I know you mentioned at one point you were studying marketing in school. I have an interest in marketing. Do you know of any professional endeavors? Maybe can you help me a little bit?
As far as like the path or places you like work.
A little bit of both, I would say.
Well, one thing that I would say is that when it comes to the marketing aspect, figuring out which part of marketing, which of the 4 Ps, right? That you're most interested in. You know, they've shifted quite a bit. The marketing mix has shifted quite a bit to now incorporate social media. There's I always teach my students the 5th P called people, and then another P called process, that have been like kind of added on. So recognizing which parts of the marketing, because there's one that is very left brain, it's heavily rooted in the numbers and the sales and all that other stuff. Then there's the marketing side that's more creative, the advertising, brand management, and strategic marketing, things of that nature, which includes like at times social media marketing, branded content, all of that. Once you figure out which side you want to be in, then you figure out is there a particular industry that is very much heavily rooted in certain things, like music, for example, music, entertainment, sports is another one, fashion's another one, food, right? Those are ones that have a very concentrated paths in terms of like working for some sort of an entity that's building out something. So once you've decided like what is an industry that maybe fascinates you, is it the marketing that you're more drawn to, or is it the industry, right? That was something I had to learn. Like I didn't want to market jars of mustard, right? I wanted to market DJ mustard. Sorry, terrible pun, but so figuring that out too is, do you love the act of marketing, or do you love what you're marketing? Once you figure that out as well, now you have which side of the game you're going to be in and which industry. Then you figure out the kind of internship that you want to get your feet wet. My advice is to pick every different kind, if you have that bandwidth and you have that time to do that, even if it's the free internships, I learned a lot by just being like, hey, can I come in there and watch? Right. And once that all happens, you have a clearer picture of the path. And you may be like, you know what? I want to start my own thing. But what do I need in order to do that? Do I need to build more of a clientele? And in order to build the clientele, if in the music realm, do I have friends who need social media building? Can I go to them and work with them on certain things? So then you have this like little portfolio. So when you bring it to a job, you're like, look, this is the portfolio that I've built. And it only amplifies the work that you have done, but it also places you in a different kind of running because it's like, I've been doing these things before I even got to the desk, right? So a lot of times we are just made to believe that this journey is just like apply for a job, see what happens. To keep yourself happy, figure out exactly what it is that you want. And yeah, it might not happen in the first shot, right? I actually, we didn't discuss this, but I've worked in like almost every department in the music industry while writing on the side before I was like, you know what? I don't know if I could do this anymore. But even still, I have multiple jobs. I write books, I do documentaries, I media train, and I'm a professor. But that also comes from my brain of wanting to do multiple things at once. But if it's one of those things where you're like, I just want to sit and do a thing, figure out what that thing is, and then make your next moves. And if you need any help on anything else, like Tyler can give you my contact information. I can definitely talk with you about it.
Well, I'm glad you said it, not me. That was my next question. Thank you. That's pretty much what I wanted. Yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you so much. Can we give Kathy another round of applause, please?
Thank you so much, everyone.
We very much appreciate your time today. And for those of you who are tuning in from outside the university, we've got our next installation of this series on Thursday with Misa Hilton. So if you follow me, yeah, very exciting. If you follow me on Instagram, I'll be announcing it as soon as I'm not teaching today. So keep an eye out for that. There'll be a Zoom link for Thursday. We'll go from there. Kathy, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you.
Thanks, everyone.
Wait,
Bye.
Kathy?